Life can be hard, but children are resilient. As a child, you can find fascination in the simplest of objects. Find friends and birds flittering by over your head, and companionship with the trees and leaves. You play eagerly and learn without intention, letting the elements of the earth breathe life into your skin and your soul. The sun dances on your cheeks and the wind rustles your hair, helping you connect to what really matters, for it is Mother Earth that provides everything we need to survive. Curled up in a bed of warmth, a belly full of berries, and a stream satiated your thirst. You find yourself drifting off to sleep with nothing but wonder for tomorrow. You are almost 4, and when the morning sun brightens the sky, you open your eyes and blink the sleepiness away, and then your eyes focus, and you find that you are utterly alone. Welcome back to Tragedy with a View. I am your host, Kayla, and welcome back to our, first Free Solo Friday episode that's not occurring on a Friday. I decided to switch these to Wednesdays just to keep them consistent with the other release episodes, so they're now just free solo episodes. Very quickly, I wanted to mention, if you are on Spotify and you're listening to this and you're like, why is this episode here but none of the others are? I had a little bit of a hosting thing for the podcast occur, and it on the back end of Spotify, the link, it duplicated, and when it did that, it just wiped the episode out. So the episode still exists. They're, as far as I know, they're on all of the other listening platforms. There's other places that the podcast is, and they're not being affected like the way Spotify is. So if you're listening to this on Spotify and you're not seeing any of the rest of the episodes, it's because my plan is to manually upload to Spotify until they get the back end of things figured out. So just be patient. They're working on it as quickly as they can. I hope that it gets resolved before this episode comes out. So this might be a completely useless intro, but there's just some things we're trying to work out. And because of that, I decided to take one of my episodes, record it as a solo episode, so that way I can figure out how to move forward if this is something that takes longer than, a few days to figure out. The Sakha Republic, which is the largest republic in Russia, taking up 1/5 of Russian territory, and it is located on the far northeast and borders the Arctic Ocean. Over 40% of the republic is in the Arctic Circle, and this means that the seasonal temperatures vary quite a bit, with the temperatures being known to drop as low as -71 degrees Celsius or -160 degrees Fahrenheit. The terrain is a mixture of mountains and plateaus, with wilderness occupying over 70% of the area. The Sakha Republic plays a huge impact on the economy because it holds most of Russia's mining towns due to the large amount of minerals the ground holds. The area is hard to industrialize due to the complexity of the terrain that is caused in combination from the amount of raw minerals that are in the ground and also the location of the permafrost area. In the summer, the ground only thaws to a maximum of 3.5 meters or 11.6 feet, and beneath this, it stays permanently frozen. In other areas, the depth of the permanently frozen ground is as shallow as 0.4 meters or just over 1 foot. This makes the ability to get the raw minerals in the area extremely hard, which in turn means that we don't really have a grasp on how rich the area is in these minerals. We're only guessing when it comes to the amount. The minerals in this area include antimony, diamonds, gold, and silver. Agriculture and transport of the goods are the next top industries in the Sakha Republic after mining for these minerals. In the Sakha Republic is a small town called Olam. The 2010 census found that the population was 39 people, which was actually a pretty large increase from the 2002 census, which had a total population of 28 people. Olam is 90 kilometers or 56 miles from the administrative center of the Olyakminsky district in the Sakha Republic, and the closest city is over 40 miles or 65 kilometers away. Olam is very remote and doesn't have roads, so the only way to get to and from Olam is to hike, or when there is snow, go by sled. They, of course, do not have cell phone service either. Olam is in the subarctic region, which means that it is in the region directly below the Arctic. Some well-known areas around the world that are in the subarctic region include Alaska, northern Canada, Iceland, northern Scandinavia, Siberia, and the Shetland Islands. The subarctic region falls between 50 degrees north and 70 degrees north latitude. For those of you who understands the impact of those degrees, I included that information. I am less familiar with what that means, other than it is very far north. The area is also known as the taiga, and when the snow or ice melt off of certain areas, the ground doesn't do a good job of allowing water to move through or over it because of the permafrost. And so in the summer months, this tends to be a swampy area. In August of 2014, Karina Chikatova was just shy of 4 years old when she was left with her grandmother while her father, whose name is Rodion, left for another village to do some work. Her mother, who was 21, went to do work on their homestead. And to clarify 2 points from what I've gathered, even though it doesn't specifically say it, it sounds like Karina's father worked in some sort of mine or hard labor type job that required him to be pulled away from his family for days at a time. The second thing I want to say is that I did find one article that implied Karina's father was not with her mother. And so this was actually her father coming to get Karina to spend a few days with her, and then he was leaving to return to work in his normal everyday schedule. But from the events, that just seems a little unlikely, but I wanted to mention it in case there's any truth behind it. So Karina was a really good child, and she was able to be left alone at a young age for periods of time and trusted that she wouldn't wander. This was mostly because the family had dogs and she loved to play with these dogs. And the family also knew that these dogs weren't going to wander, so they trusted that Karina would stay with the dogs. On the afternoon of July 29th, 2014, Karina's mother and grandmother came back together at their home and realized they couldn't locate Karina. Further, one of the family's dogs was missing, who I've seen a couple different names for. Mostly I've seen the dog referred to as Naida, and the other name that I've seen is Kyra-chan. For the sake of this story, I am going to call her Naida. So the women come together and look for Karina and Naida. Once they realized that they were nowhere to be found, they figured that Karina must have followed her father. 3 days later, when he returned home, he came with the news that no, Karina was not with him, and no, she had not followed him. It was at this point that a search mission began, and time is, of course, the essential motivator, as Karina has already been missing for 3 days. Not only are there bears and wolves in the wilderness surrounding Olam, but Karina was at risk for starvation, dehydration, and hypothermia. Even though it was August, temperatures were still dropping near or below freezing when the sun went down. The family would alert authorities that Karina was lost and not been seen for 3 days, and people from other small villages would report to help find Karina. While they suspected originally that she had followed her father, with the new information from him that she had not followed him, they really had no idea what direction she might have gone. It is worth mentioning that authorities didn't automatically take Karina's family for their word, so while search teams were brought in to search for Karina, authorities also knew that murder was not off the table. In total, about 100 people would look for Karina in the days to follow. As the days went on, in a desperate attempt to find Karina, a helicopter was brought in to search for signs of the girl from above, along with the use of drones and search dogs. The first day without clues turned into 2, then 3, then 4, and on until the 6th day. Searchers were losing hope that they would find Karina at all, let alone alive. At this point, they searched a radius of 18 miles or 30 kilometers surrounding Olam, and there was some heavy worry about wildfire that was nearby, which was causing the air to be heavy with smoke, which limited the visibility. This was also causing all of the animals in the area to behave a bit more aggressively, so they were really worried about that as well. And the only signs that they found that Karina was somewhere out there were her boots and her jacket. That is until Naida showed up in town. Naida pranced up to the rescue team 9 days after Karina had been last seen. Naida approached the search teams just close enough that when they tried to grab her, she took off in the opposite direction. Then she stood there like she was waiting for them to follow her. It didn't take long before searchers caught on and followed Naida back into the woods. But as they followed her farther and farther, Naida began to seem like she didn't know where she was and couldn't locate the girl like they had hoped. Searchers began to lose hope again, but then on the 11th day, rescuers were combing a field that was adjacent to the field Naida had led them to when one of them, by the name of Artyom Borisov, saw some dark hair and a small hand. Among the tall grass, Karina was curled up inside the grass, which she had used to create a bed. Though she was tired, malnourished, and clearly had lost some weight, Karina was healthy. She also had a ton of bug bites and stings on her legs and arms, and she was found about 4 miles or 6 kilometers from Olam. So, as a reminder, she was well within the search radius that they had set up days prior. Artyom picked up Karina and carried her to a car that was nearby, and on the way to the hospital, she was wrapped in blankets and given some tea to help her warm up. It was then that Karina burst into tears. And I want to circle back on something, because I want to be clear about certain things that occur. I can only give you the information that I am provided with, and that is available online, whether that's through news articles, case information. Sometimes I get information from books, but not all of the time. And I just want to point out that I do the best I can with the information provided. So there's the implication that because she got into a car, that there's some form of road that was taking her to and from the hospital, even though there were no roads in Olam. And that's not to say that I don't believe one thing or another. It's simply, I just want to point out the likelihood that the car was just the best option that they had at the time, and it doesn't dismiss that the road was probably really rough and it was going over less used terrain and less of a road and more of a trail. But along with that, you can make your own conclusion. There was likely some sort of path or trail system that people use leading in and out of the town. And maybe it was wide enough for a small car. Maybe it was wide enough for a big truck. I'm not sure. But there is potential that somebody says that there isn't a road just means that there isn't a paved road. There's a lot of wiggle room in this information. And in this particular story, because it is coming from Russia and a lot of things get lost in translation and misinterpreted. So I just wanted to say that real quick because they do put her in a car to take her to the hospital, but there were no roads. So I can understand how that's a little confusing or maybe misleading. And I wanted to make sure that those bases got covered so that way you can draw the best conclusion to the story that you can. So Karina would spend a few days in the hospital for observation. They determined that she wouldn't have any lasting repercussions from the experience. When she returned home, she saw Naida and immediately started yelling at the dog for leaving her, which is such a 4-year-old thing to do. And then began the questions. What happened? How did Karina end up in the wilderness surrounding Olam? And how did she survive for 11 days? But Karina was not alone in this. Naida was with her. And at night, Karina would curl up in the tall grass that would create a bit of insulation from the ground, and Naida would curl up around Karina to help keep the both of them warm. During the time that she was lost, even though it was August and summer, the temperatures were dropping down to 42 degrees Fahrenheit or 6 degrees Celsius. Karina found berries that she could eat and would drink from a stream when she came upon one. A year later, there was a statue that was put up in the city of Yakutsk to honor their story and survival. But Karina is now grown and is going after a new recognition instead of being the girl who is known as the real-life Mowgli. Karina has left Olam so that way she could attend the Yakut Ballet School and dreams of performing in Swan Lake. This story had a positive outcome, but not all stories, especially when it comes to children, have the same. There does tend to be a much larger response for search and rescue calls when a child is involved, but how a child handles being lost in comparison to adults and how first responders respond to whether it is an adult or a child plays a role in how the story ends. For example, according to deep survival author Lawrence Gonzalez, who has authored multiple books on the science of human behavior, he has found that children under the age of 6 or 7 tend not to get this impending doom feeling that makes them think that they need to be at a certain place at a certain time. And because they don't have this feeling to respond to, they tend to stay in one place longer rather than move around and try to find their way. Kids are also a little bit more in touch with what they need. They will eat a plant when they're hungry. They will drink from muddy water puddles, and they will cover themselves or hide in a hollow log when they are tired and want to sleep. As children grow older, they lose this connection with what their bodies needs, which allows for them to survive longer. Adults even will take off in a direction in an attempt to reorient themselves. And then when they don't recognize where they are at or see any signs of what direction they should go, they panic and try to find their way back to where they were. And it just leads to a more chaotic either trail for rescuers to follow, or it becomes impossible to follow. Not only can this make people extremely hard to track, but it also exerts a large amount of energy that could be better used to keep yourself alive rather than find your way. The downside to children in comparison to adults, and specifically how responders react to them being lost, is that some can't fathom how far children can go. Lawrence Gonzalez has studied groups of people, including fishers, hunters, and hikers, and found that children will often travel the farthest distances. Rescuers, in turn, don't apply a big enough search field to the efforts, and therefore, children will often be found outside of those search areas. Some really simple ways that you, if you are ever lost, can make yourself more likely to be found is, first and foremost, stay put. Another tip that I like is to leave your itinerary in your dashboard window. So that way, if, somebody comes in and they're like, this car has been here for 5 days and it shouldn't be, then when they walk around your car and try to figure out what's going on, they'll see your itinerary. And this can be a good place for rescuers to start as long as you stick to your itinerary. The other potential ways to make yourself easier to be found is to put yourself in some place that will make you visible. So like a clearing, or if you have bright clothing, put on bright clothing. If you have something that is unnaturally patterned, put that on. Organize sticks and rocks into an SOS. Things like that will help people who are looking from above potentially see you a little bit better. And then the last thing that I'm going to say is that you should stay near places that rescuers are more likely to look for you. These places include trails, water, roads, and abandoned buildings. So take those little things, tuck them into the back of your head in case you ever need them. I hope you don't. But in case you ever do, you have some ways to help yourself out. And I hope you enjoyed this story. We will be doing another episode next week. I'll be talking to you a little bit more in depth about book club. All right. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening. Please take a moment to rate and subscribe from wherever you listen to Tragedy with a View. To get access to ad-free episodes, bonus content, and more, please join us on our Patreon. The link will be in the show notes. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook. And to share a story of your own, send us a campfire confessional email at tragedywithAview@gmail.com. We'll see you next time.